connecting, feel free to enter your name and where you're joining from into the chat so we can get a sense of who all is on the Zoom call today. My name is Melanie Sands, and I'm with Eastern Research Group, and we are the contractor working with the state of Vermont on this project for the development of the Municipal Vulnerability Index. So thank you for joining us this late afternoon or evening. We're really excited to tell you about the process we've been undertaking to develop the tool and share some of the tool itself with you and walk through that with you. So before we get started, we thought we'd do some brief introductions. As I was mentioning, I'm Melanie Sands. I'm a senior social scientist with Eastern Research Group. And then also joining from the Eastern Research Group team, we have Lindy Lowe, Anna Claire Marley, Caitlin Barber, Jim Chilton, and Elizabeth Weathers. And then we've also been working with the Agency of Natural Resources, the Climate Action Office, and with Marion. And Marion, would you like to say hi and introduce yourself? And if Jane's on, Jane as well, perhaps?
Sure. Happy to introduce. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining this evening. My name is Marion Woles. I'm the Resilience and Adaptation Coordinator at the Agency of Natural Resources Climate Action Office. So we are working closely with Eastern Research Group to develop this tool, and we're excited to share it with you all today. And Jane Lazorchek, who's the Climate Action Office Director, I was doing kid drop-off, so I think we'll be joining soon, but we'll throw her name out there if you see her join in just a minute or two.
Excellent. Thanks, Marion. A couple other groups or people I wanted to acknowledge. We've also been working with Eric Engstrom from the Agency of Digital Services for the state of Vermont, and then also members of the Municipal Vulnerability Index Task Group, which is comprised of members from the Vermont Climate Council. They've been providing input and feedback and engaging with us throughout this process. And we'll talk a little bit about that or touch on that in the upcoming slides, but I just wanted to mention them as well. So I think before we get started, a few housekeeping items, and we just ask that everybody keep their line muted while we walk through the presentation. We'll be doing questions at the end of the presentation, but if you have questions along the way, feel free to go ahead and enter them into your Zoom question and answer feature, and then we will we'll address as many as we can at the end of the meeting. All right, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we will get rolling. All right. Elizabeth, can you give me an okay if you see the welcome screen? Yes, we can see your screen. Awesome. Okay. All right. Well, thanks again for everybody for joining us. And then it's going to maybe be a little bit of lag time there. Okay, great. So our agenda for this evening's presentation, we're in the midst of our welcome and introductions right now. And then we're going to transition into talking about the background and a little bit of background and impetus behind why the tool is being developed, and then also the purpose behind the tool. Then we're going to transition into talking through the process we're coming to a close on, but we've used to develop the tool. And then we're going to share the tool itself. We're going to do a walkthrough of the tool and walk through some example use cases so that you can have a better sense of what you might expect in using the tool and get a little bit of a closer look at the tool. And then we'll close out with a period of questions and answers. Okay, so first we'll hit the background and purpose behind the Municipal Vulnerability Index. So as many of you may know who are joining this presentation, in 2020, Vermont passed the Global Warming Solutions Act, and that act required the Climate Action Plan to really include several strategies, as you see listed here on your screen. Those strategies are to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, help communities prepare for the impacts of climate change, and also consider opportunities for carbon sequestration. The legislation also mandated the development of a municipal vulnerability index, and it would be an index that would indicate municipal vulnerability to climate change based on a range of social, economic, and biophysical factors. When working with the state team, we've come to understand at the beginning of this process, when we were all trying to sync up on what the tool would be, we came to understand that it would be a web-based geospatial mapping tool that could be updated over time. So what we'll be sharing with you this evening is really the development of the first iteration of this tool. So this is the foundational iteration of the tool that is expected to be updated with new data as it becomes available, and possibly other considerations for different features and functions over time as well. The tool is intended for planning purposes only, not necessarily intended for regulatory use at all. Really intended to inform climate adaptation and hazard mitigation planning and decision-making. So for example, developing local hazard mitigation plans or other local climate-related plans. Local communities might also use it to help inform their decision-making around how to prioritize climate-related projects or funding that they may have. And then the tool is really going to provide a visual understanding of where current vulnerabilities exist and the factors that contribute to those vulnerabilities. On the left-hand side of the screen, that diagram is really reflecting the core tool user groups that are envisioned at this time. And that includes municipal staff, regional planning commissions, state agencies, communities, and other non-governmental organizations. So now we're going to transition a little bit into the development of the tool itself. So this diagram is really just a high-level overview of the process that we have undertaken to develop the tool. And we're going to get into a little bit more of the detail on each of these steps as we move through the subsequent slides. But just to give you a lay of the land before we get into those slides. So let me get a pointer out here. So we really started here at the evaluation of existing tools. So as we'll discuss, we looked at geospatial tools that already are in existence to see how that could inform the tool development. We then conducted a range of engagement efforts to inform the tool development and the data sources that might go into the tool. And so once we had a sense of that information of existing tools and engagement, we then had to try to identify available data and information that could be used in actually implementing those things in the tool. And then we also had to consider, well, what is the tool going to look like? What are the factors or the things that inform climate vulnerability that we want to include in the tool? And what kind of framework will we use to show that vulnerability or describe that to the tool user? So once we had those things in place, then we developed a tool, and then we underwent, and I get it out there, we underwent tool testing. So now we'll just get a little bit into each of those steps in a bit more detail. So first, we conducted the evaluation of existing tools. And really this evaluation of existing tools was an evaluation of map-based tools that were geospatial in nature, and they might be a visual platform or a geospatial tool themselves. We also considered the type of data and information that these tools used, and how they might apply to the tool that we are developing. Some of the types of tools that we reviewed, just as an example, for instance, in Vermont, the Vermont Social Vulnerability Index or the Vermont Transportation Resilience and Planning Tool. We also looked outside of Vermont to other similar tools that we might be able to learn something from, such as the California Climate and Health Vulnerability Index or the Rural Capacity Index. So we looked across this wide range of tools to see what we could learn. And really that helped us understand a couple of things. So in this middle circle in the slide, it really helped us better understand some components of the tool that might be applicable to the MVI. And that was things like, what is the purpose and objectives and what was produced by the different tools? What are they generating? What are we seeing from them? Who is using those tools? Who is the audience for those tools? What types of methods did those tools use? And were they transparent methods? Could we understand them or duplicate them? What was the design or the usability of the tool? Were they user-friendly? Did we like features and functions? What do we like about the aesthetics, things of that nature? And then again, we considered the relevant data or information. And that might be the type of information, the geographical scale. Was it national scale, state, local level? And then also how accessible was that data? Was it publicly available or was it private and difficult to access, for example? So we were able to better understand some of the tool components. And then we were also able, in this last bubble here on the screen, we were also able to start developing a list of draft factors, or those things that inform climate vulnerability. One of the next things we did was we conducted some engagement, and we really did rely heavily on engagement efforts when developing the tool, because we really wanted to make sure that the people who would be using the tool could find it useful and it would really suit their needs and be something that people would find helpful in their work. And so when we look at this screen, we have several different types of engagements that we conducted throughout the process. And on the leftmost side of the screen is the MVI task group meetings. And this is sort of a little bit separate from the other columns on the screen that we're going to go through. But the task group, really, they provided input and we engaged with them throughout the process at key junctures throughout the process. So as you can see, going down the column of your screen here on the left side, we consulted and got feedback from them about the different factors of climate vulnerability, the type of data that's available. And then we also talked with them about who we might engage and how we might engage people. We also received input from them and feedback on our methods and framework. Now, this next three buckets of engagement, that was a more concise, concerted engagement effort in the process after we did the evaluation of existing tools. And we did several different engagement efforts. The first being on online meetings with tool users. So we had these longer online meetings with municipalities and regional planning commissions. We also had conversations with tool partners, and tool partners are those entities whose work overlaps or is in parallel to the development of the MVI. We wanted to understand what other similar tools or tools that had overlapping functions or linked to the MVI. We wanted to understand their development process and what we could learn from them, or areas where we needed to align with the work that they've done. So some of those tool partners that we had conversations with in developing the MVI included people who were involved in the development of the Vermont's BioFinder, Community Resilience Index, and again, the Transportation Resilience and Planning tool. We also did a series of interviews, and we had several different groupings of interviews. We had interviews with municipalities, and in parentheses, you can see the municipalities that we had some interviews with. We don't need to read them all off because I know that you can see them, but Brattleboro, Newark, South Burlington, for example. We also had a conversation with the Vermont Public Service Department and several electric utilities to understand how they might use the tool and considerations that we might capture from them. And then we also talked with representatives from the grouping that we refer to in this project as affected populations. And affected populations are really those that might experience disproportionate impacts from climate change based on a variety of characteristics such as race, ethnicity, age, income, education, their shared geographic location. So when we thought about that group, we wanted to also talk with some people or organizations working with and for that, that group of affected populations. And we spoke with the Champlain Valley, Office of Economic Opportunity and Capstone Community Action. We also spoke with natural resource conservation districts and also community resilience organizations. Some of the things we learned through the engagement efforts, we learned how to refine and prioritize some of the climate vulnerability factors from that draft list that we had compiled from the review of and evaluation of existing tools. They really helped, those conversations helped us determine the best available data and information that we could use to measure those factors. The engagement also helped us inform how the tool might be used and what types of features and functions that people would find helpful. And we also developed some considerations for tool implementation through that process, such as, are there staff capacity issues that we need to consider? will training be needed for the tool, things of that nature. Okay, so once we did the review of existing tools and we did this engagement effort, we were able to distill several categories or domains, as it's labeled here, of climate vulnerability and a more finalized, firmed up set of factors for each of those domains. So for example, you can see the categories running across each of these columns with the factors underneath. So on the leftmost side, for example, the first domain being social, and different factors that might be linked in the social category might be things such as population, income, whether a house has a vehicle or internet, if they are experiencing energy or transportation burden, for example. Under the community domain, we considered a range of things that you can see here, such as what the municipal staff capacity is like, or their historic districts or other designated areas that would be of note or impact vulnerability. Under economic and jobs, really the focus here in this category are occupations or industries that might be more heavily impacted by climate change or climate vulnerabilities, such as outdoor workers, agriculture, the tourism industry. And then under built and physical environment, we considered things like emergency services, mobile homes, the age of housing stock, or whether they're critical assets and what critical assets are nearby. And infrastructure, I think we all have a sense of what infrastructure is, but just to give a couple of examples, whether they're roads, bridges, and culverts and where those exist and would be mapped out, but also things like drinking water and wastewater infrastructure. Under natural environment, we considered things like the municipal tree inventory, whether toxic or contaminated sites nearby that might be impacted, conserved or protected lands. And then on the far right, we have our list of hazards or natural hazards that we would consider for the tool. And we did try to align this as largely with the state hazard mitigation planning list of hazards. So you can see here, we're considering in the tool things like drought, extreme precipitation, hail, ice storms, landslides, snowstorms, high and low temperatures, and wildfire and wind. Once we determine the set of factors, again, we had to think of how are we going to measure them? What kind of data are we going to use in the tool to get at these things to show climate vulnerability? So then we had to undertake this step of identifying data and information. Given the time frame and our charge with the tool, we were looking for data that was currently available to measure factors. So we looked, for example, at data used by other relevant tools, such as those tools we reviewed. We also, we had sources suggested by task group members or other individuals that we engaged. So really trying to find the currently available data that we could use to measure factors. We also learned through engagement efforts that in order for the information in the tool to be meaningful, we really needed downscaled or a more granular level of data to be meaningful when people are using the tool. So if you're zooming in at your municipality and you're trying to assess a vulnerability in with it on top of a certain hazard, you need it to be pretty granular to see your area. Like maybe if you're beyond a county level data, it's not going to say much when you're looking at your municipality. So we needed that granular data, really looking at a county subdivision level. We also wanted to use Vermont specific data where possible, so that it would be, again, we really reflect what's happening in Vermont and for the communities in Vermont. We also really wanted to consider other vulnerability analyses that had already been conducted. So maybe there are analyses that already did some of this work. We don't need to repeat the whole analysis, but we wanted to consider, should it be integrated into the tool, and how would we maybe take that information and bridge it with this tool? And some of that information, for example, was the analysis for the Transportation Resilience Planning tool. There was also a UVM study of mobile homes and floodplains that we were able to integrate as well. And then lastly, we had some non-spatial data that it's really, well, what do you do with non-spatial data in a geospatial tool? And we didn't want to just leave it out. So in addition to writing about it in our user guide and acknowledging it there, we included a series of written narratives that will help the user can click on so that you can still read about those types of vulnerability factors, and that it still brings attention to them, even if it can't be mapped in a geospatial way. So here, just really, again, showing how we're finalizing what climate vulnerability factors we were including in the tool, because this was a really large part of the project. What will be included? What will we look at? So we had this wide range of factors that we identified, and then we narrowed them in the second block of the triangle going down. You can see some of the things we did, again, to narrow the set of final factors that would be included in the tool. So we went back and we looked at that language in the Global Warming Solutions Act. We considered what we heard from people in engagement activities. We also considered what data is available for that and at what scale. If we don't have data, we really can't include it. We also wanted to really give an eye toward the usability of the tool. So we wanted to make sure that anything we included was not going to make the tool so overly complex that it wouldn't be user-friendly. So as we narrow down, we then end up with this list of final factors. Once we had that list of final factors, we worked with the Vermont state team and the task group to really select a framework and methods for developing the tool. What we agreed upon was a flexible user-guided approach. And this approach really takes those different vulnerability factors and it uses them each as different geospatial layers in the tool. And really that generates this layered geospatial information that a user can look at to make their own assessment of vulnerability of hazards. And that is in contrast to a situation where there might be a single vulnerability metric or score. So it's really putting the onus on the user to select a location and conduct their own assessment by selecting hazards and factors of interest and layering them one on top of another. We also determined that where there was non-geospatial factors that were important, non-geospatial information, that we would really look at where are state averages or thresholds for that information and flag instances where a municipality is above a state threshold. And when we get a little bit later in the presentation, Anna Claire is going to show an example of that, because I know that's pretty vague, just as a general bullet point here, but we'll circle back to that in a little bit to hopefully clear that up. We also, in talking through the methods and the framework, again, we were integrating existing data sets in developing the tool, and we wanted to make sure that the underlying data for the factors and hazards would be accessible so that we could provide more details to the user about that data. And then lastly, as we mentioned before, the tool will be designed to be updatable over time with new data or new information as it evolved. Some of the benefits of this type of approach is that it's really tailored to this situation where we have multiple hazards or multiple assets. So in this tool, we have that whole range of hazards that we just went over. So this long list of hazards, and then we have all of these different factors. And so it can be it's a more simplified way in some ways of being able to layer hazards and factors of your choosing and looking at that assessment rather than trying to do a more complex calculation when you have all of these hazards and factors to roll them up into a single metric of vulnerability, for example. That can be pretty complex or just very time consuming. This approach can also really help drive municipal action, again, by providing specific locations and details of vulnerability. So again, you could look at, you can look within a certain municipality and look to try to see what is the power and electric infrastructure in a floodplain. You can choose things of interest in your area and kind of really focus in on them, choosing things of interest to you. And that can really help you in plan development or project review because you're able to just focus in on the elements that are of greatest interest to you. And this approach also simplifies changes to data and outputs for future updates of the tool as well. Some limitations of this approach: it really requires the user, it's very user driven. So it's a pro and a con, right? The limitations of that is that the user will select those hazards or factors of interest, and they'll do that and look at the vulnerabilities and make assessments on their own rather than receiving a single output or score for each municipality. And really what that requires is user understanding of information being more important to a driver to determine which areas to explore. And so as we'll go through some use cases to highlight what that might look like as we walk through the tool. But again, on the third bullet there, a limitation might be that it doesn't provide the opportunity to compare vulnerability or resilience across municipalities by a single score. So you can't just click on a municipality and you get this score, and you get another score, and then you can compare them in that way. It's much more nuanced within each municipality. So once we've gone through all of that and we built a draft tool, we then conducted some tool testing to really understand how we needed to tweak things, what could be improved, for example. So we did a questionnaire implemented online through Qualtrics software. And this tool test or questionnaire was given to people we had previously engaged, people in the task group, some state staff, people who had already been on the tool journey with us a little bit. And so we invited 29 people to participate. 11 people were willing to do that. And what that participation looked like is that we provided a couple of written scenarios for them to practice using the tool, try to get familiar with it. And then we asked a series of 9 questions, the 9 core questions. There were sub questions depending on what you selected, but 9 core questions to really get feedback on these topics that you see listed here. So aesthetics, the functions and features of the tool, the ease or difficulty perhaps of using the tool, and also suggested improvements. And we got information and we integrated what we could into this iteration of the tool, and what we were not able to integrate, then we are capturing in our final project report so that it can be considered for future iterations. So with all of that said, I know it was a lot that I'm throwing at you really quickly. We'll go ahead and take a look at the resulting Municipal Vulnerability Index tool as it stands in this first iteration. And for that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Anna Claire Marley, and she's going to do the tool walkthrough and use cases. And I think I'm going to stop sharing my screen briefly so that she can share hers, and then we'll move forward. All right, Anna Claire, you should be all set to share your screen.
All right. Thank you so much, Melanie. Hi, everyone. I'm Anna Claire, and I'm a climate resilience and data specialist at ERG. You through how the tool works and some different ways that you could use it. Am I still on? Can you hear me, Melanie?
We can hear
Okay,
you.
I just got a message that said Zoom quit unexpectedly, but I think it didn't.
Oh.
No, I can see you, and
okay, so we're still rolling. All right. So just to start off with, when you get to the tool, this is what it looks like. So you start with this map in the background of Vermont, and you can see all the lines are the different town boundaries. And this is just how it loads automatically. On the left-hand side are the different map layers, and these have the different categories of factors, which we call domains, on the left-hand side here. And I'll show you how you can open these and change layers in a minute. And then on the right-hand side, we have the legend. So this shows you what layers the map is showing, and if there's any details that you need to know about coloring, etc. And then you can zoom in and zoom out, and then this takes you back to the regular zoom. And then on the left-hand side, bottom left-hand side here, you can see there's this little button that's kind of looks like a layer sandwich. So that just shows and hides the map layers here, but those pop up automatically. And then we have the legend right here button, and that again shows and hides the legend. We also have a button right here that could for you to print the map, and I'll show you an example use case of that a little bit later on. And then we also, here is this button that you can use to change your base map. So for example, if I clicked on that base map button, and then I can choose from a long list of different base maps. So you might want to use a base map for different reasons. Maybe you want to look at the satellite version, so you could zoom in and see what things look like from a satellite view. Or in this case, I just put a light gray canvas to show how you could simplify the base map to not have so many things on it and make it look a little cleaner. But going back to the main base map that we've been using, if we want to change what layers are shown on the map, on the left-hand side, we can just expand the different factors here. So for this example, I'm showing expanding the social domain factor. So you just click the little arrow here, and then you can choose from a range of factors like the ones that Melanie outlined earlier in her talk. And so just for an example, I'm going to show you what it looks like to click on the low income one. And to do that, I just click on the eye icon so that now there's not a cross over the eye and we can see the layers. So we clicked on the low income factor, and you can see the different colors across all the different towns. So this data is from the American Community Survey, which is basically from the US Census Bureau. And in this example, we're showing low income, which is the percent of people with incomes that are less than 2 times the federal poverty rate. So we have a legend here to show the range of different percentages the towns have. And if we're interested in any one town, all we have to do is click on it, and then a pop-up will come up and will show us what the exact percentage of low income people there are living in the town, as well as the data source as a reminder. So this way you can see generally how the different towns look across Vermont. And if you want to learn more, you just have to click on the town. And then I also wanted to point out that if you click these 3 dots on the right here next to any one factor, you can increase or decrease the transparency. I'll show an example of that later as well, in case you want to see the base map better or see any layers underneath it better. And then you can also export the raw data as well as a CSV or a GeoJSON, which is kind of like a shapefile. And then you'll get all the data for that factor across all of the towns in Vermont. So for example, if I clicked on export CSV, I would get what the percentages were for all the towns across Vermont for low income. Okay, so the MVI includes several ways to understand the vulnerability within a municipality using both map layers and flags to identify factors that are known to influence climate vulnerability. So while all the factors included in the MVI affect vulnerability, the tool includes flags when a municipality has more than the state average of a factor that needs to have heightened attention. So for example, here we clicked on Granville, and it says that the percentage of outdoor workers is above the state average. So if a municipality has a higher number of outdoor workers than the state average, that municipality receives a flag for that factor to ensure that attention is paid to identifying strategies for outreach and education for that population, as well as how to develop actions for the state and town can work to reduce risks to outdoor workers. So the flagging system just allows the user to quickly identify areas that may represent the most consequential vulnerabilities and prioritize seeking grants and funding to reduce those vulnerabilities. So it's kind of a quick way to see what are the main vulnerabilities affecting this town, and they're flagged in terms of they're more exposed to this factor than the state average. And if I wanted to find out what the actual percentages are, for example, if I wanted to look at the percentage of people who are outdoor workers, I can always click on that factor layer on the left-hand side, and then it will show up I'll show all of the layers just like we did for the social vulnerability. And then I can just, again, click on that town and get the actual percentage too. So this is a way to look at, explore things by factor. And then the flag is a way to see what's kind of a summary of the main vulnerabilities for each town. I also wanted to point out that we included other Vermont vulnerability projects in this tool, such as the manufactured homes and flood areas data and the transportation resilience planning data. So the transportation resilience planning data is a separate tool that's housed at the Agency of Transportation. We're just pulling the data over so that you can look at this data in relation to some of the other data sets that we put on. And so, for example, here, this is in that other vulnerability projects domain. I click on it, and then I click on the transportation resilience planning subheading, and then there's a bunch of data layers within that umbrella that you can choose from. And here I'm just showing the roads data from the transportation resilience planning tool. And then on the right-hand side, I can see the legends for high, medium, and low vulnerability. And again, this isn't our data, this is pulled in from some other vulnerability tools. But for this tool, we did do some of our own analyses as well. So if we're going to look at the hazards layer grouping here, and I just clicked on drought, for example, we can see the average number of weeks in severe to exceptional drought per year in Vermont. The drought data is at the county level, so that's why you see that same color across those areas. And then we can see it looks like around at maximum, the counties have about 18 weeks in drought per year, according to these indices. And this is from the US Drought Monitor. So in this way, the user can look at social, community, different factors, but then also look at these hazard data in comparison to those. Another data set. So in general, we did use a lot of historical data for the hazard data, but wherever possible, we tried to use data that's projected out to account for climate change and future projections. So for example, here, one of those is high temperature projections, which is the days above 90 degrees per year. So to take a step back, if you're wondering where this data is from, so this data is from these global climate models that are made, but the global climate models are very coarse resolution. So they tell you what could happen in a square that covers many, many miles. But we want to bring that data down to a local scale so it accounts for the climate and terrain that Vermont experiences. And there's many ways to do that, but the statistical method that we use is called LOCA, and that's used by the National Climate Assessment. And that was done by UC San Diego, which is where we got the data from. So if you're wondering why it says UC San Diego, they're just the people who are taking those big global climate models and making them into something that is helpful for Vermont, and not just making Vermont one ginormous square of saying it will increase by 2 degrees. That's not as helpful. So on the left-hand side, we can see all these different projections. If you're not familiar with the different climate projections, it can be a little bit confusing, so I'll just walk you through it really quick. So first thing to note is we have the years at the bottom where it says 2015 to 2044, 2045 to 2074. So those are the different year projections for this metric. And then kind of like the latest and greatest way to talk about how climate change could impact things in the future is by these things called shared socioeconomic pathways. And all they are basically just narratives for how things could go in the future, how we could handle climate change, and then what the impact of that would be. So we chose 2 different narratives, the middle of the road narrative and the fossil fuel development narrative. So the middle of the road narrative basically just says the world will keep doing broadly what it's been doing and following historical patterns, and nothing's really going to change. So that's kind of like the business as usual, nothing much changes, we'll continue on as we're going road. And then we also looked at the fossil fuel development road, which is kind of a little bit more of the worst case scenario, where it's a world of rapid and unconstrained growth in economic output and energy. So in this way, we're kind of looking at what happens if things pretty much stay the same, and then what happens if things get markedly worse. So in this way, if you're looking at it, you can think of middle of the road, business as usual, looking at the years, fossil fuel development, what happens if we rapidly intensify our emissions. So for example, on the map right here, I'm showing you the middle of the road projections for the days above 90 degrees Fahrenheit per year for 2045 to 2074. In comparison, let's look at that same year group, but for the fossil fuel development. So you can just see things moving from like light yellow and orange to much darker colors. And for just to point out, that's about 100 to 120 days of above 90 degrees Fahrenheit temperatures. Okay. So then I also wanted to point out that we have all these data sets on the map, but we also have these additional vulnerabilities, kind of written narratives. So these are just to highlight different vulnerabilities that we don't have geospatial data for, but are also important to consider when you're thinking about vulnerability and planning for the future. So we have a different button for each of the different domains in the map layers tool on the left. And so, for example, if I clicked on this one, which is the built and physical environment domain, I can read about different things that would affect the built and physical environment. And I just pulled up, for example, the heating and cooling centers. So we talk about how the presence of heating and cooling centers is a key vulnerability topic for climate change, especially as it relates to high temperatures. So far, I've kind of shown you what you can do from just looking at Vermont at a state level and kind of comparing things across the state in terms of vulnerabilities and hazards. But let's say you want to zoom in on a town and get really granular. And so we can talk about how that kind of analysis, how this tool will help you with that kind of analysis. So first of all, you can use this search bar here to immediately find where you wanted to zoom in. So for this example, I just typed in Burlington, Vermont to zoom in, and it just takes me to this spot right away. So you don't have to like scroll in and click and find where you want to zoom in. It's a helpful shortcut. And then I looked at the hazards data, and I decided that I was interested in looking at inundation flooding, and specifically the FEMA National Flood Hazard data. So I pulled that, I clicked on the eye here. And then if we look at the legend, we can see FEMA National Flood Hazard data, and then the different types of flood hazard that FEMA has categorized. So the red that you see a lot of is the 1% annual chance floodplain. And if I wanted to, again, just pointing out that you can do that decrease transparency thing. If you wanted, like for example, I want to see what the base map underneath looks like and what exactly is flooded underneath, I could increase the transparency so I can see that. And this is what it would look like. But let's say that you wanted to look at which areas of a town are going to be flooded. So we have data, and we have data for that. So if you look at the community domain, I just pulled that down. And then I looked at the downtown district boundaries, which is this green boundary here. And then the neighborhood development areas, which is this light blue area here. And so just showing examples of different things you could look at. And it might look at this and say that, okay, a portion of the downtown district is at least vulnerable to flooding according to the FEMA flood hazard data, and it's in the 1% annual chance flooding zone. So we have kind of like more spatial area data that you can use to look at these things, but we can also get even more granular and look at things at the parcel and building level. So for example, I went to this built and physical environment domain, expanded it, and clicked on the critical assets layer to look at which critical assets are going to be affected by flooding. And this is E911 data. So if I'm looking at this, I can see all the critical assets their building footprint has been colored in, so it's easy to see it. And on the right-hand side, we can see all the things that were categorized as critical assets, like schools, libraries, health clinics, etc. And then I can look to see what's going to be affected by flooding. One of the things that jumps out at least a little bit is this purple building over here. It looks like it's a wastewater treatment plant that's in the flood zone. So if I want to learn more about that plant, all I have to do is click on it. And now we can have a pop-up that tells you what the name of the site is, the address of the site, any other information that comes with the data. And then you can also do the same thing for other point data sets. So in the infrastructure domain, we also have information on power lines and power poles. So maybe you'd want to open that up and look at where the flooded areas coincide with the different power lines and power poles, and look at how that interacts. And then if you want to print it, it's really easy. You just click on that little print button, and then this comes up and asks you what type of paper size you want, choose it, and then you can just click print, and then you get a little PDF printout of the map. So it's ready to go, and you can stick it into a report or just have it for future use. So these are just some of the different use cases for this tool. There's many more, and there's many more layers and factors that you can explore, but hopefully these are helpful ideas, and I would encourage you to play around with the tool and see what interesting information you can find out. And with that, I will pass it back on to Melanie.
Thanks, Anna Claire. So our next steps in the project, we're currently developing by the middle of April, a user guide that's going to accompany the tool. And this user guide really outlines a whole range of things we talked about today, methods, data sources, some examples of how to use the tool, how to use tool functions and features, some of the things that Anna Claire walked through, really trying to have it be a pretty thorough companion to the tool, so that people can understand the underlying data, how to use the tool, things of that nature. And then we're also developing a final project report. And that project report is going to be pretty comprehensive to capture everything we've done throughout the project to develop the tool. And again, have documentation of the user guide and other documentation about anything that accompanies the tool, that between the development on our end and the trade-off to have it be hosted on Vermont servers, and making sure that everything can be easily updated over time so that everything is clear for the tool's update and maintenance over time, in terms of anything that we developed. So we'll be developing that documentation by mid-April. And then as we go into April and May, we'll be doing a tool training for regional planning commissions as an initial training. And as many of you know, regional planning commissions often work with municipalities as well. So that will be a starting point for training. And then that the tool release is anticipated for mid-April. So a lot happening in the next month or so. And then really we'll just be making some final tweaks to the tool over the next week or so, based on these final presentations that we're having, so that we can pull all of this information together. I think next slide, Anna Claire, please. So I think with that, we can open it up to questions. And if you could put your questions in the Q&A, that would be helpful, so that Elizabeth can field questions for us and we can address them.
Yeah, there are no questions in the Q&A yet, but there was just a quick question in the chat regarding the year the census data is from. I assume it's from the most recent 2020 census. Is that correct, Anna Claire?
Yeah, it's from the 2020 census.
Great. And then there was another question in the chat which Marion addressed, but I just wanted to reiterate to see if there was any additional input. The question was asking if there would be a summary of data sources available once the tool is developed. And the answer to that is yes, it will be part of the final report and user guide. Then they were also asking about maintenance of the tool, options for inputting and adding data, so that the tool can provide support to municipalities as best as possible. And again, Marion addressed that in the chat, but just wanted to open that up if Sam, you had additional questions there. Those are the only questions we've received thus far. And I just received a question in the Q&A asking if health department data will be linked dynamically. Ned, if you also would like to elaborate on that question, feel free to come off mute if you have anything to add to that.
No, it just seems like there's a lot of different aspects of things related to heat and epidemics and episodics that might be important to link in somehow, but just interested if you're doing that or how that might get updated as you go along.
Sorry, I just froze. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thanks for the question, Ned. So we actually met and spoke a few times with the Department of Health to think about if we could directly link their social vulnerability index into this tool. They're actually working on updating and creating sort of a separate tool, the Community Resilience Index, which I think you may have seen called out on one of the presentation slides. That is quite a different format from the Social Vulnerability Index, and so it didn't make sense to link directly in the tool. But I think as we're thinking about future updates to this tool, we're talking closely with the Department of Health about their updates potentially to the Heat Vulnerability Index, to how they track and report warming and cooling center locations, and whether or not that can be, the MVI can be used as a platform for that. So it's certainly conversations we're having and thinking about how we can better integrate updates and health data into this tool. So I think the answer is yes, and that's something we're thinking about working together with the health department on as we build this tool and use it as a platform to look at climate vulnerability broadly.
Thanks, Marianne. A similar question received about linking planning atlas and energy planning data, asking if that will be linked as well in future iterations.
I think it's something we can consider. I do like, I think it's the planning atlas where you can toggle between the energy planning data and the planning atlas data as sort of two separate tabs in the same screen. I know that's something we like as well. I think that's something we'll have to figure out with ANR and ACCD data sets, but we have the same GIS managers at ADS, so I think that wouldn't be too difficult to work on and think about incorporating that into that data set. Again, with the MVI currently, while it was a long list of factors, trying to keep it to a manageable level. And so acknowledging that there's sort of other data sets like energy data that could be incorporated here, I think that's a conversation to have for future updates. I will say some of the data from sort of planning atlas with those designated areas that you saw in some of Anna Claire's examples do come directly from the planning atlas, as well as we have the data on plan and regulatory status at a municipal level as well. So some of that is already incorporated into this tool.
Thanks, Marianne. And we've received a couple more questions in the meeting chat regarding beta testing, asking if folks will have the opportunity to experiment with the tool and if people can volunteer to be beta testers for the tool.
So I think at this time we've wrapped this round of beta testing, or at least for this iteration of the tool. So at this point, we're pretty much en route to finalize the tool for this contract with the state of Vermont. So I think as the tool's made public, you can certainly use it. And I think that there will be other iterations of the tool that can certainly accommodate additional feedback as we move forward. But I think that we're closed with the beta testing for this round of the tool.
Thanks, Melanie. Here's another one just coming in live. The question asks or states, the July flooding really showed us the lack of a platform for tracking municipal road conditions, FEMA projects, damages, event data, etc. Will this tool integrate event-specific data to track historical events for local hazard mitigation plans?
So some of the data in the tool, like the hail events and the winter storms, ice storms, are based off of historical events that have happened from the NOAA storms database. So we have some things that are based off of event data, but I think if we, as the tool is updated, it would continue to include new event data in those analyses.
Thanks. Not receiving any additional questions at this time. I think people should feel free to raise their hand as well. Ask questions live if they would like. Oh, just received another in the Q&A. So they're stating that currently municipal data is sent bit by bit to different places. What is the expectation or the ideal for municipalities inputting data versus data coming from more top-down sources? And I'm not sure who asked that question. So again, if you would like to unmute and elaborate, please feel free.
Yeah, just to, I guess, whoever asked that question, if you'd like to elaborate, if you're asking about updates to the MVI or more broadly use of municipal information, it'd be helpful to hear kind of a little more detail on your question there.
Hi, it's me, it's Sam.
Sam, go ahead.
And Tashi, for those of you who like dogs. Yeah, I was just thinking, it's, I think one of the really useful things or one of the tricky things about doing a lot of the planning at the municipal and regional levels is that intersection between, okay, here's a data source that's been compiled, obviously loses a lot of clarity, a lot of resolution, a lot of local specificity, and then like sort of the ad hoc data that municipalities may collect on a short-term basis, but send it off and don't really necessarily have an aggregated list themselves. And so kind of just thinking about like, is this intended or could it be used to sit in the middle so that towns can also, you know, during a disaster, maybe it's connected to 211 or when it's connected to VEM's like EOC reporting page or whatnot, or maybe they're able to input data or sort of track data themselves, whether that's in a report that's put out after an event or after, you know, a plan update or in an annual fashion or something like that. I'm just trying to think of things that sit in the middle of like that sort of large scale data aggregation sometimes that misses the scale that we need on the ground, and then sort of providing folks an easy place to aggregate lists that maybe get reported when they can or when they think of it, but maybe get sometimes missed or something like that.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, you know, I think as Melanie, like the intended use of this tool is to be a planning tool to help explore sort of where potential characteristics or indicators of vulnerability may intersect with a whole range of climate hazards, and to use that to inform your local hazard mitigation planning or your local energy planning or emergency management plans. And that's different, I think, than sort of what you're describing, which is a sort of ad hoc or more time-specific collection of data that could be then used in like response or recovery activities. I think it's certainly something we can think about as we, you know, we're just wrapping up phase 1 of this tool, but I think thinking about future iterations of it and how it can be better utilized and really better serve municipal kind of climate response, disaster response purposes. But I think at this point, you know, as Melanie indicated, and sort of culminating and pulling together the factors and then identifying the data sources, we were really looking at those that are collated at a state level so that we can show it while at a municipal level, so you can kind of dig in, but that it's sort of across the state, and which is, I think, different than what you're indicating of municipal data that's maybe not collected at that state level. So it's an interesting point. I think something we can keep in mind and put on sort of a wish list for 2.0. Thanks for the question.
Great, thanks, Sam and Marianne. Someone also quickly asked, when can we start using the tool? So the anticipated release for the tool is mid-April, and I believe at that time it will be available. And next question asks, if we are starting a new town planning cycle, should we reach out to our regional planning commission for training on the tool or to give us vulnerabilities for our town?
Well, I don't know. Well, do you want to jump in there, Marion? Either way is fine. I can.
Sure. I mean, I think I can. So for the previous question, we're kind of don't want to release the tool without a user guide, which will be really helpful for folks to walk through, hence the mid-April timeframe for releasing the tool. And then in terms of town planning timeframe, I think you all saw on the slide there, we're this sort of separate from this contract, but working with BAPTA and the RPCs to roll out training the RPCs in the use of this tool and really helping thinking through how we can best provide resources to support municipalities in the use of this tool. Anticipate that process sort of happening starting in that May timeframe, as you saw on the slide there. So, I mean, there are RPC folks on the call, so I think would encourage you all to talk about town plan updates and reaching out to municipalities, reaching out to you all. But I think we're looking at the tool release in April and then sort of starting to provide support for RPCs to and then for RPCs and A&R to support municipalities in the use of this tool in that time frame. So not a complete answer, but that's what we're thinking of timing, and hope that works out with what you're thinking of for town plan updates.
Any other questions?
Haven't received any in last 30 seconds-ish.
All right. Well, I think that we may pause there then. Jane or Marion or anyone from the ERG team, anything else that you would want to say before we close out today? Okay. Hearing nothing, I think we're all set then, but thank you everyone for making time to join us and learn more about this tool. We're hoping it's going to be useful, and again, it's first iteration, so it's always a learning process, but hopefully we have a good starting point, and we hope that you'll be one of the early tool users, and hopefully it will be helpful to you. So thank you for your time, and I hope you have a good rest of your evening. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.